Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. So my name's Aaron Jones, and at this point, you should be able to see my screen. So who am I? I am the program champion at the University of Advancing Technology. And just if you all don't mind, if there's any questions that end up popping up in there that I need to be interrupted for, if you could just let me know, because I won't be able to see the chat while everything's sharing. Okay, here we go. So I'm the program champion at the University of Advancing Technology. I have a history in law enforcement. So I did 5 years on the US-Mexican border in Operation Border Star. And while I was there, I started out working on things like game cams and narcotics interdiction, license plate readers, and just all the technology related to investigating crimes and kind of how we monitor for individuals trying to enter into the United States without permission and things like that. Well, during that period of time, I realized I really liked technology. And so I moved from just working in that aspect over into also pursuing a bachelor's and then eventually a master's. So started also getting into education. I really like going around teaching and training during that period of time while I was in school and everything else. I traveled up and down the US-Mexican border from El Paso all the way down to the Gulf and back. And I would go out there and I would teach sheriffs and DPS troopers and all kinds of different folks on technology and cybersecurity and how to secure some of the systems that they were using, and assisted them in doing everything from hiding cameras to talking about how to handle their iPads and other technology that was being issued to them out there. And so when I wasn't doing that, I was also working in intelligence analysis, and just really enjoyed all of that. I earned recognition from the El Paso Police Department, state of Texas, Texas Military Forces, the Chandler Police Department, a whole bunch of other people. Just absolutely love technology. In addition to that, I helped found the Phoenix Linux Users Group Cybersecurity Meetup out here. Pre-COVID, we were speaking, sometimes twice a month to the public. After COVID, it hasn't been as good, but I'm sure all of that stuff will eventually come back. Some of the individuals that I've worked with are law enforcement, military. You've got your government officials that would show up, and then just your concerned members of the public. I am a AZ post, which is Arizona Police Officer Standards and Training general instructor. So I'm kind of trained and taught to teach amongst law enforcement out here. And so that's just me. I'm also a TLO. I don't know if anybody knows about the TLO program out here. We used to be called terrorism liaison officers. I'm now a threat liaison officer because they have added cyber to what we do. But with all that said, I love teaching. I love working on computers. I love cybersecurity. I love all of this stuff. So today we're going to talk a little bit about operational security, but first we're going to touch on privacy, because privacy is incredibly important to better understand how operational security affects us. So if anybody here is familiar with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, they have a fantastic mathematical formula that I like to reference all the time. And that mathematical formula is, just a moment, please. Getting messages, and I'd like to turn that off. They have a fantastic mathematical formula in which they have deduced that with 33 bits of information, you can pretty much identify any person on the planet. And so at this point, some of you may be either familiar with this concept, or you may be thinking to yourself, okay, well, what's a bit? What am I going to do with that information? How do I find a bit? So typically your web browser will provide approximately anywhere from 16 to up to, I've seen as high as 21 bits of information. So just the web browser that you're using is going to, okay, perfect. Just the web browser that you are using is going to provide a substantial amount of information about who you are. Obviously, many of us know about the ability to fingerprint a web browser. Whenever you are using a web browser, you have the ability to gain a ton of information on the server side about what IP address is being used, what operating system is being used, what fonts are installed, what languages they may potentially be able to support, because obviously if you have certain fonts for specific languages, then you can make the assumption that that system is set up to handle those languages, and so on and so forth. So there's actually a lot of information that is available to a user. In addition to that, other information that may be able to be used to identify a person includes things like their surfing habits, their shopping habits, what they're doing with the computer, where they go, what kind of web pages that they surf to. We're typically creatures of habit. You have a baseline level of behavior that you're going to follow on any typical day, right? And occasionally we're going to have some changes to that. If every single day you get in your car and then you drive to work, and that trip takes anywhere from 18 minutes up to 23 minutes on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, and then Saturdays and Sundays, typically you sleep in, so on and so forth, then I'm going to know that information via your cell phone. So because your cell phone has GPS and you carry your cell phone with you, that cell phone is going to be in a place where it's typically available to you, right? Like most people don't leave their cell phone at home every single day. Then I have an idea following that, that I know where you go. I know what your typical day-to-day behaviors are going to be. I know whenever you're gonna head to lunch. I know what area that you're typically going to be in for lunch, and so on and so forth. All of that also constitutes that idea of bits, right? Um, if you own a Corvette, let's say, uh, and I'm trying to figure out who you are, but you own a Corvette and your shopping habits include purchasing items, parts, car parts, whatever related to that Corvette, and all I have is a general area of where you live, well, then I can go out and I can gather information about Corvette owners within a certain area, and then maybe I have some additional information like the fact that you took a photo on social media of the outside of a courthouse, and then from there you can kind of drill this down into, okay, have any of the cell phones for any of the owners of these vehicles traveled out to any of these areas within this amount of time, and so on and so forth, and then eventually you find somebody, right? It's no different than how like a murder investigation is handled. Somebody carries around their cell phone with them, they have an event that occurs, they end up into a violent altercation, and then they run away, and then we can go in and we can find geofencing off that area, what cell phones were there, what cell phones left the area immediately around the exact amount of time, and so on and so forth. And it's all kind of investigatory work 101 related to being able to identify who a person is based off of mostly metadata. Now, I know that within this room and the individuals that I'm speaking to, most of you are already going to be familiar with terms like metadata, but please forgive me. I'm going to talk as though we're all at a much lower baseline, just so that we're all at the exact same level. So what is metadata? Metadata is all of the information that surrounds an object that can then be used to give me an idea of what that object is. Think of it like a mold, right? If I have a mold and I look at that mold, I can see a general idea of what that object is. And then if I have both sides of the mold, all of that is not the object, but then I can generally put it together and I can figure out, oh, okay, this is a blank, this is this item. So your metadata is kind of like a mold. It's all the data that surrounds a person or an object or a place or whatever it is. And it tells us just by looking at that enough information so that we can identify that thing, that person. There's a lot of information that is available that's just based off of metadata. So combining metadata with just very, very basic 101 level investigatory work, it's very, very simple to oftentimes get to your 33 bits. Now, people do things like they try to hide, they try to disappear, they'll attempt to vanish, they'll do tons of different things that could potentially cause you issues. And that's still okay, because for the most part, as long as you have access to a computer and a device, or somebody, at least one other person, kind of knows who you are or knows where you're located or a general idea of where you are, then pretty much eventually somebody's going to be able to find you. So that's a very, very basic level entry to entropy, and the idea presented by the Electronic Frontier Foundation on how many bits of information that we need to understand who a person is. So they have a browser fingerprint tool, and I'm going to click on this, and you can come here and you can test your browser. And this will also show you some of the information related to how many bits of information that your browser is releasing to the world at large. The way that I like to explain it to folks is, and you can see am I blocking ads? Yes. Am I blocking invisible trackers? Absolutely. Is my browser protecting me from fingerprinting? Well, no, it's not. My browser has a unique fingerprint for sure. I'm unique among the 199,032 individuals who tested their systems within the past 45 days, and my system is giving up 17.6 bits of identifying information. So between my user agent, which shows you that I'm on Mozilla, which comes here to Chrome, and because it's WebKit, right, or Gecko or whatever. In addition to that, you can see the size of my screen. That information will be down in here as well. You can see what time zone a person is potentially in. Obviously, this could change in the event that somebody's using a properly set up VPN. Any of this information could potentially be spoofed. I really like the fact that this says 1920 by 1080. That's not true, but that's what you're seeing here. I run i3 window manager, so I can change some of these items just based off of how I'm looking at things. And then you can see the hash of the canvas fingerprint, which is also very, very important. The canvas for your system and how things are painted to the screen, all of those are bits of information that somebody could potentially use to figure out who you are out of a laundry list of other users who might potentially come to a web page or so on and so forth. So it's not just IP based. Oftentimes people think that, oh, once somebody has your IP, or if they can find your IP and it doesn't go back to a VPN or something similar somewhere, then, well, that's the only information that we're looking for, the only information that we care about, or the only thing that we should consider. That's absolutely not true. While an IP address is a piece of everything that you do here, it's not necessarily the end all be all to deciding whether or not you can figure out who somebody is. So are there some things that we can do to prevent people from being able to take a look at our system? Absolutely. You could containerize your browser if you wish to under Docker. One of the things that I like to do is I run an EC2 instance through Amazon AWS. And within that EC2 instance, I will spin up either a Linux or Windows box, and then I'll use Ramina. And Ramina is an application that's available for Linux, and it simply gives me the ability to do something like RDP, right? So if I need to remote desktop into another computer like my EC2 instance, I can do so, and then I have an access to a browser there. In addition, you have access to tools like eLinks and Links. Both of those are command line based browsers. One of the things that I really like about command line based browsers, and when I'm talking to some of my investigators or individuals who might run into something that they need to be concerned about, typically your stock standard configuration of both eLinks, Links, Link, LYNX or LINKS. Any of these systems are going to be command line only, and that means that there's no images. So if you're having to deal with people who are sharing things like child pornography or something like that over Twitter, and you just need access to the text, and you want to make sure that you're not loading any images to where they're visible to you, then you can use a tool like eLinks in order to load up a web page, and then all you have access to is the text, and then you can grab the links to the images, and then you can pass that on to the investigators who potentially may be authorized or more prepared in some manner to deal with some of those issues that you might run into. And so with that said, you can use an EC2 instance without any kind of graphical user interface if you still need to be able to surf the internet, as well as you can do it through a graphical user interface that would be available through something like RDP or so on and so forth. Other things that you can do, you can use a tool like FireJail, and then you can start the process of doing some kernel namespacing, and you can set up your browser in such a way that you can hide your user agent. You can use a VPN. You can do all of these other things. There's plenty of different ways in which you can change what other individuals will see. But the thing that I would caution against with that is be very careful, because the more changes that you make, obviously, the more likely it is that people would be able to potentially use that information to identify who you are. Because instead of you hiding amongst the trees, right, you planted your own forest, and now you're standing in this very demarcated off zone, which is why when I'm using something like elinks, I'm not worried about it as if I'm doing an investigation, or I'm assisting something related to law enforcement or something like that. I can run elinks, and that's totally fine. It doesn't matter if somebody sees that or whatever. um, but if you're not involved in something like that, and you are doing something where you don't want somebody overseas or something like that to see what it is that you're doing, you may not want to necessarily demonstrate that you're capable of using a tool like elinks, or something similar, right? I like to think about some of the individuals who recently their chats were leaked. They were working within the industry related to crypto locking computers, and one of the guys couldn't even figure out how to close them, right? And so everybody knows the joke, right? What's the most effective way to generate a random string? Hand somebody a copy of them and then ask them to close it. The guy was absolutely a caricature of that issue. So there are things that you can do. Be cautious before you make these changes, uh, because in the event that you make those changes, it's very, very easy to come back, take a look at what those changes were, and then kind of run that back to a location or a person or somebody, just based off of what they know. So what are some of the things? Now, I've been talking about like law enforcement. I've been talking about issues related to what if I want to try to avoid somebody knowing who I am overseas whenever they see me coming to a web page and I'm surfing to something. And this is even applicable here internally. And I'm going to tell you all a little story. And this story, I'm going to leave it as may or may not have happened, but imagine for a moment that you wake up in the morning and you head off into work and you sit down at your government issued computer, and somebody had sent out an email reference a individual who was having some anti-government thoughts and threatening individuals, and had created a web page where they had claimed that members of the NSA and the CIA and all these other people had like drilled a hole into their bedroom and dropped a robot into their ear and all these different things, right? Um, is it likely? Probably not. But the fact is that they're threatening violence due to these kinds of issues and so on and so forth. Uh, well, somebody decided to take that link and put it into an email and then send that out to an intelligence mailer filled with individuals who have .gov and .mil and IP addresses that go straight back to locations all up and down the East Coast and the West Coast and every Joint Operations Intelligence Center across the United States and all these other places. And so by the time I got there and I right clicked, copied the link, and then dropped it into a application that I could use, and we'll talk about archive.is and some of this other stuff here shortly. I dropped it into something that I could then load it without it showing my IP address. The guy had created sort of this manifesto on the front page that stated, when they come for me, and they're going to, and he showed the list of IP addresses with all the .mil stuff, and then he had done some GeoIP lookup, and then demonstrated that some of these IP addresses were coming from locations out on the East Coast and all this other stuff. And he was like, when they come to kill me, I just want you all to know that I didn't commit suicide, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he had this just enormous breakdown of issues related to the fact that everybody was looking at his webpage. And if they were looking at his webpage, then it's obvious that it was right, right? Like if he gets up and he's making threatening statements and he's saying terrible things and he is doing all of these odd things, and then the fact of the matter is that we came and we looked, Well, now that's proof. He has his evidence that everything that he said right and the ear robots are real and all of the issues exist. Well, that's an operational security issue that we, as whether we're an investigator or we're trying to teach or we're learning or we're doing anything, we're going to end up at some of these web pages where people have some modicum of cybersecurity skills. And in addition to that, they're going to be looking at things like their logs, they're going to see IP addresses, they're going to check to see who's visiting their web pages, so on and so forth, right? And so we may not want that .edu showing up. We may not want an IP address that comes back to a desktop that's housed out at a local educational institution or at a joint operations intelligence center or any of these places. We might not want our browser information dropped off in such a manner, right? Like, there are tools that you can use that come directly from Amazon. Now, I'm not employed by Amazon, but I really, really like the Amazon tools. I use AWS GovCloud on the regular at my law enforcement position. And then over at UAT, which is the University of Advanced Technology, we use AWS for all sorts of stuff. I am a very large proponent of Amazon AWS. And for somebody who spends an inordinate amount of time talking about things like operational security and intelligence and some of the privacy implications that come along with the cloud, what I would tell you is, if you're a bad guy, I would love for you to have all the social media, literally all of it. If you could get a Facebook and a Twitter, and you could get Mastodon, and you can hook it up on Instagram, and you can carry your cell phone around with you in your pocket, literally everywhere, I would absolutely appreciate that. Please do that. And also using a tool like Amazon to track all of that information, that's absolutely, that's the greatest thing in the world. When people ask me who should have social media or why shouldn't I, if you're a business, have social media. People need to be able to come and look at your business and do all of that stuff. But what I will tell you is, and I have a social media account, I have a LinkedIn. Why? Because I have to network with people. And if you look at my LinkedIn, you'll see all of the people that I go meet and all the hands that I have to hold and all the things that I do that has that historical information. And you can absolutely go in there and you can find out all kinds of information about me. You can find out what consul general I was speaking to, right? So all of those things are available through social media, and that's okay. But when you have an individual who may be mentally ill and you're trying to find out who that person is, what you don't want to do is give them a great big old pin drop right on top of a soft target, like an educational institution, and say, yes, these people are the ones that are coming and looking at you. They're investigating you, whether that's true or not, right? Like, this person could potentially have written some code, or, I mean, I'm sure everybody in here is probably familiar with Terry Davis, right? So Terry Davis had a lot of mental health issues. Terry Davis had a lot of problems with intelligence agencies here within the United States, and he had all of these mental health issues where he would get online and tell everybody about how if you see anybody who's involved in intelligence agencies within the United States, you should hit them with a car. But he was also very, very famous for writing his own operating system from scratch and having a cult of personality that surrounded him. And so the man, he's now passed away if you did not know, but he was very, very smart. He had computer skills. And in addition to that, he had a cult of personality on social media that surrounded him, thousands of followers who would spend their evenings speaking to him. And he could oftentimes rally them to take action on his behalf. And so, in the event that somebody were to go in there and rile that group up, that could have potentially became an issue. And us being investigators, us being individuals who go out and we tinker and we look and we learn and we spend all this time, that's one of the reasons why I like to make sure that people know that you should be cautious of some of that. In addition to that, we can also talk about things like advertising and surveillance capitalism. I don't like advertisements. I run an ad blocker. I do. I will admit it. I don't like ads. I don't want to watch a video from SeatGeek demonstrating individuals bent over, showing their behinds, and them pretending like their butt is speaking to me. I have no interest in that. And those are current ads that are running on YouTube right now. There are systems that I use that don't have access to um, tools like ad blocker and things like that on the browser. I can't install those things, and so sometimes I have to see some of these things, and I don't like it. I don't want to see it. I think it's insulting. Um, so what I would tell you is, whether it be your cell phone, your devices, your computers, so on and so forth. There are numerous items that you would be able to add to this as well. Obviously, they follow you around using ad systems. So your Google remarketing and some of these other tools, everybody knows this as, all I did was I went to Google and I typed in how do I groom a dog, and now I have 35 advertisements that are showing up across all of my applications with dog groomers in it, right? And I'm sure everybody here has probably even fielded that question in a classroom where somebody said, I was sitting there and I had my phone out and I was talking to my girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, and I mentioned a word and now I'm getting advertisements about that. Well, yeah, if you take a look, they ask, do they have access to your microphone, so on and so forth. And then they will, they go in and they do voice processing and et cetera, and it's all part of that machine learning. And we get to that point where you then can go and you can pull information about stuff like Alexa, where you can see that they have developed a system with the microphones so sensitive that they can find out just based off of the microphone whether the windows in your house are open or not. Like there's tons of cool stuff that we're all aware of, but again, when I'm talking about advertising and surveillance capitalism and operational security and all of this other stuff that goes along with this, these are all items that we should certainly touch on in some capacity, just for the sake of completion. So when you have a user that asks you these questions, some of the things that you would be able to do are, you could run a Pi-hole, which I do locally. I've run 2 of them. So if you look over here over my shoulder, you could probably see just very lightly, I have a full rack. I've got my Threadripper at the top. I've got my NAS in here. And then I have 4 Raspberry Pi 4Bs that are mounted directly within a 1U system. It's all PoE, so power over Ethernet. I have only a single cable that runs to each one, and each one of those is running a DNS server. You can see it's just Pi-hole, and then I can monitor all my queries and what I'm blocking and the percentage of all of my traffic that's blocked and so on and so forth. Again, that's part of your operational security, is you don't know what you don't know. So in addition, if you start to become concerned about what people know about you, what you need to have in terms of personal privacy, what do you need to be aware of? Well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to start building a baseline of what your footprint is for who you are as a person. Because I talked about this earlier, I touched on it. With a cell phone and the GPS available through that cell phone, I know where you go and I have a baseline of who you are. And as soon as you start making weird behavior, then that's information that could potentially be valuable. You start going to Sally's Beauty Supply and you start buying large amounts of hydrogen peroxide in bulk. And then you start making trips to different government buildings. And then you start filling your phone up with pictures. And before, you used to go every day between home and work. And then out of the blue, you start making these side trips to different Sally Beauty Supplies all over your city. And then in addition to that, you're also going to government places and you're taking photos and you're hanging out. What are you potentially doing, right? You're pre-screening for attack, maybe? Or maybe you switch jobs and now you go out and you dye people's hair. Which one is it? Who knows, right? At that point, there still needs to be more information and more metadata and more things need to be collected and people have to find out more. But at this point, we now have an oddity, an offshoot. So for us as users, it actually becomes incredibly important that we have a baseline for who we are. So tracking things like your DNS, being able to see what web pages you go to. And this also goes back to just personal security within your own network. If you out of the blue see attempts to connect to a system located, let's just say out in South India, and typically you don't do that. Your family goes to YouTube and you go to your generic Facebook, and maybe you have a daughter and she loves Instagram, and mom is always on a really cool fun web page for her makeup and so on and so forth, and you have all of these things broken down and you see that basic normal traffic, and then out of nowhere your son's computer starts repeatedly trying to communicate with the system out in India or in Southeast Asia or any of these different places, well, now it's time to immediately circle the wagons and, hey, let's take a look. Is he playing a new game? Or is this a command and control system because his system is infected and it's trying to find a place to phone home because he went out and he downloaded something when he shouldn't have? Maybe he thought he was getting some cheats for a video game or something, right? And we can always play what if. That's kind of that's the police and that's the law enforcement and the military mindset. The mindset is what if. You have to play that constantly. What if I'm sitting here and I'm eating lunch and somebody walks in with a firearm? What do I do? Do I move? Do I try to flip the table? Do I jump down? What do I do? And that they will tell you this even during the earliest levels of training is you have to play what if. And so I recommend this to all of the individuals who work within cybersecurity. It's what if. What if you see weird traffic on your network? What if the DNS queries change? What if you start to see oddities on your network? And it all goes back against that singular grain of cybersecurity. And many of us are probably thinking to ourselves, yeah, I kind of already know that, but are you bringing it home? Are you just doing this at work? Do you show up every day and you run a Splunk server at work and then you filter all your logs and you dump that stuff in there and then you go home and then you're good? Or are you bringing home that personal security and that knowledge and all of the other things that you use at work on a daily basis? And are you using that for your personal protection and for the protection of your family and so on and so forth, right? And it goes also back to that operational security. What are you bringing home? What fingerprint do you have? I can tell you that I have worked at places where people have been followed home out on the U.S.-Mexican border by people from Mexico, right? You get in your car and then you realize somebody's following you. And that becomes an instantaneous problem. Now, that's a physical security issue, but really and truly, what's the difference between that and somebody potentially getting something into your laptop and then they know everything that you do from home up to and including gaining access to, let's say, your bank accounts or something similar, right? So typically I would talk about and when I wrote this a long time ago, I would also talk about some of the Chinese attempts to create what was called Sesame credit at the time. We now know it as the social credit score. This really isn't so salacious anymore because it's just kind of everybody knows about it. But they make decisions on what you're doing based off of monitoring all of your traffic. So if you go out and you buy diapers, well, that's considered like a positive thing. So your credit score goes up over there. But if you spent too much time playing video games, or you have a child within the household who spent too much time playing video games, then your social credit score goes down. We're starting to see some of this. I'm not going to say rolled out here within the United States, but they're definitely looking at this. You can go to some of these centralized repositories for information on people, and they're using it. So whenever you go in to get a loan, they're looking at, hey, what web pages does this person visit? How likely is it that they're going to pay the loan back? Let's take a look at their social media. Let's see who they're connected to. If I go to your social media and I see that you're connected to a whole bunch of people who are just going wild and spending money and being super frivolous, maybe you're a higher risk and I should give you a couple of extra points on there. That we already know that that's happening. There's already been discussions about that in the news. And in addition to that, we're seeing some of these major corporations go out and they're taking all of these disparate databases and they're combining them down. And anybody here who does open source intelligence, I mean, you've seen PeakU and Spokio and all of these other tools that you can go to. I'm certain, and I see some hands and stuff. If you all don't mind, I'll open up for questions in maybe like another 5 to 6 minutes. Okay. In addition to that, you have Google employees, multiple times proven to go through people's emails and all of their other stuff. At this point, I would also urge you, if you are not doing so already, consider setting up some of your more secure private stuff within your own hosting system, even if it just comes down to mail in a box. I sit down with law enforcement, police in general, and I will assist them in setting up mail in a box. Mail in a box is a product that you can use that allows you to run your own Google, your own email, your own file sharing, and so on and so forth. I have links on my webpage if you decide to go here, but you'll be able to see there were Google employees who went around and went into people's emails, followed little girls. I actually have a ton of information about this guy because I spoke to actual Google employees, because I did this talk, or at least a similar talk, in front of a bunch of Google employees. And then they all scampered up to stage as soon as I was done and grabbed me and asked me, hey, can we tell you all about this guy? So uh, what I have here is very, very light. Like, I talk a little bit about some digital noise and just the fact that this guy was looking through little girls' email addresses and going through their contacts and stuff like that. It's actually way worse than that. But this is a recorded place, so we're not going to talk about that. Tor is not perfect either. At this point, somebody's going to jump up and they're going to say, hey, what if I just start using Tor for everything? Remember, there's tons of metadata. I love the story about the Harvard guy who, on the day of his finals, and this is probably applicable to all of us, right? So he's sitting in the dorm, it's finals, he doesn't want to have to take his test. So what does he do? He jumps on Tor and he uses text to speech to contact the school and say that there's a bomb within the organization. And he makes these threats, and so they had to shut down testing. And within about 30 to 45 minutes, law enforcement was already there at the door knocking, saying, hey man, did you call in a bomb threat? And the guy said yes. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, if he was using Tor, how did they do that? It's test time. They check the network logs. The only student using Tor at the time that the phone call was made was that specific student. How easy and quick is that? Like, you might as well put a bow tie on it. And all they had to do was walk up to the door, knock, and say, hey, man, did you do it? And the guy immediately broke down into tears and said yes. So Tor is not a silver bullet. I have people who tell me, well, I'll just use Tor whenever I'm doing something. There's a lot more that goes into that than what you think. So there's privacy threats. Very quickly, I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. I'm not going to show all of them because some of them have dead bodies and things like that in it. This isn't the place for that. But again, if you go here and you want to see some of the potentially offensive material, some of that is on here as well. And I'm waiting for archive.is to load. There's tons of places you can use. You can either roll your own on EC2 or you can use archive.is. But anytime you're working with a link and you don't want to take a look at that link via your system or any of your tools, dump it into archive, dump it somewhere else, let them load it first, and then you can take a look at it. And then that prevents your IP address from showing up, and so on and so forth. And their site is super slow. I'm not going to say that it's not. It can take a very long time for archive to load, but once it does, the discussion here on the Israelis, they had to shut down an entire operation because their soldiers went on Facebook and then told everybody that they were going to go kick butt in a very specific area and gave the bad guys all of the information about their exactly what they were doing. The next one is a bunch of United States Marines and other members of the military. They got together, found all of the nude photos that they could put together of fellow soldiers and females within the military, and then created a group where they were sharing all of that information, including pictures of these young ladies' faces, their bodies, names, ranks, where they were located, so on and so forth. That got a bunch of people in trouble. And then more information related to individuals here within the United States and abroad who have worked with groups like the Russian military to assist in calling in airstrikes overseas just by doing open source intelligence related to videos and things like that. So if you have a video that you find on YouTube, there was a point in time when the Russians were asking people for assistance, kind of crowdsourcing airstrikes. It's super interesting. It's an incredibly interesting topic, and it has a lot of kind of implications to what I think we're going to see over the next few years in terms of individuals now being able to involve themselves in different conflicts. I made that statement before. I said that people all over the world will start involving themselves in different conflicts just based off of either self-radicalization online or via the ability to make direct contact with individuals who can do direct action overseas. And we're seeing that, right? We see it across, whether it's the Ukraine, Russia, so on and so forth. There's tons of places that you can go on Discord. You sit there, they'll give you stuff to do open source intelligence on, and then they reward you by filming themselves blowing people up and then providing you either the pictures, the videos, or so on and so forth. And again, there's evidence of that within these two photos. And again, I'm not going to bring those up though. So with that said, I had a bunch of law enforcement stuff I wanted to talk to about on this, but this is usually a 2 to 4 hour talk. I'm gonna just check the chats real quick. Uh, let me see here. Recession. Recordings. I see people saying hello. That's great. Bought a bunch of H2O to a Sally Beauty Supply last fall. That's funny. Give me your contact number. Sorry, I'm late. Can you send us from HP to everyone? Give me your contact number. Okay. Drop in the chat. Do you have a law enforcement concept? So we have open source intelligence courses. In addition to that, I have my students work on a ton of stuff related to law enforcement. So the web page itself, I can give you this, and then you can kind of explore around this. So I'll dump that in the meeting. And so 2 of my students were going to put this out inside of our social media and all of this other stuff that's going on here. But 2 of my students got to go out and actually work with some of the individuals who do executive protections. And so you have law enforcement within executive protection, you have private contractors, and then you have like military and so on and so forth. And so they had a training class. I got my students added to that class, and they came in and they talked about cybersecurity with my assistance. Of course, I ran as lead, but I have my kids do the presentation, and then any questions they can't answer or if they need any assistance, I provide. And then they got to do a ride along. And so when we work with, and when I say ride along, that just means that they got to go out with these individuals on the final piece of their training. They went to an airport, they got to get access to a private jet, bring a young lady off the jet, and then they went out and they moved her to an area pretending like they were running protection for that event and running the intelligence side for it. So we do a lot of like really cool training with a lot of mixed bunches of individuals that gives them that opportunity to work on some of this stuff. What school is this? This is the University of Advancing Technology. Our School of Business offers a 4-session seminar, budgeting, managing, offers some for cybersecurity. Foundation for less tech savvy adults or even older adults. Yes, so if you want, I'm sure my contact information will be available at some point. It's ajones@uat.edu. I don't know if it's okay to put that. I hope you don't mind. But if anybody wants to reach out to me with some questions about assisting less tech savvy students or adults, we do that, and that's also part of the TLO process here within the state of Arizona. So my mandate is to provide educational opportunities to individuals to protect them from like being victimized, right? So I actually have a lot of resources related to being able to bring that to the table depending on where you're located. Obviously, my number one thing is if you're not in the state of Arizona, I would recommend, if you're within the United States, contact a TLO within your state. And if you don't have access to one, you can contact me and then I'll try to put you in touch with somebody. But if you don't have that support within your state, or they have not made those strides yet, Arizona is probably the number one state. And I know somebody's going to get mad and be like, my state is way better. I understand that's cool, but honestly, Arizona and the Arizona educational institutions here, our government here within the state of Arizona is just an amazing place for cybersecurity right now. And the relationships that we built between educational institutions and our power companies and the individuals working within water and critical infrastructure and the Arizona Counterterrorism Information Center and all of these folks, we're doing amazing, awesome things out here. So, and if you were doing amazing, awesome things in California and Florida, send me a message. I would love to hook up in some way. I just sent 5 of my kids to Florida to work on your Hack the Port, and that was super awesome. They had a ton of fun. I know Florida is doing cool things with the individuals in the Coast Guard, and so would love to talk to you all about that. Arizona doesn't have a lot of coastline, but we do have some folks who wear Coast Guard uniforms out here. Any other questions about anything that I talked about here? Anything that I can support on this? I hope that this was at least interesting. I'm sure some of this information is, there's some of you who are way, way more advanced than this, but I appreciate you bearing with me while I talked about some of this. Awesome. Yeah, and one other thing that I would add is, if provided the opportunity to do so, take some time to read some of the older, like maybe 1975 to 1995 ish investigations that were related to some of the stuff that was going on with like the mafia up north, and just look at some of the behaviors that were practiced during that time when they were able to bug an entire car within like 15 minutes. They bugged houses by pretending to be individuals involved in um, TV repair and all kinds of other stuff. There's a ton of really cool information from that era that's very applicable when you need to get like a USB thumb drive plugged into somebody's computer. There's just a lot of really neat stuff. Um, so yeah, I see another question. Do you get to work with private eyes and military soldiers with this school? Sort of. So as your grades have to be good, you have to be participating in things, and then as things come up, then I push students towards those things. So I had 5 kids who are at TSA right now, and TSA actually issued them badges and computers and so on and so forth, which is super cool. And then I have 2 students who are going to be working with our local National Guard on a cyber project out here, and then I have 2 students that I sent to work with essentially what you would say like a private force. They do training and education for individuals who are going into hostile environments, and they have everybody from law enforcement to just like the private guys who are going to go sit on boats and carry guns. And so we've assisted those folks as well. If you're interested in any of that, send me a message, like I said, and I can put you in touch with like our PIO office. I apologize, at UAT they're not called PIO, but they're my PIO people, and they can give you all kinds of pictures and videos and cool stuff that we do, and just a load of information about what we get the kids involved in. And if there's any schools on that would like to talk to me about that, please send me that message. My email's in the chat, and I'll drop it again just in case. And so any CIE organization, I'd love to do something with you all. If we can collaborate, work together, let's make cyber better for the entire United States. Like, let's do positive things. So anything that we can do, please let me know. So with that said, if there's no other questions, if I reword it, you can track me using my browser and hardware. Can you still do it with VirtualBox? So potentially. So VirtualBox also has a fingerprint related to it. VirtualBox would still reveal whatever your IP address is unless you're masking that in some way. So again, it's layers of security. It's not necessarily that you're going to find any one-shot item. Like, there's no silver bullet. I can't come to you and say, if you do X, you're invisible against everything, because it's not going to be that case. And let's just very quickly, let me touch on Tor here. Tor is not that bad when you think about the user experience, right? I go out and I pull a Tor browser down, and I use the Tor browser, and I hit the button, and I sit there for 10 to 15 minutes, and then it gives me a connection, and now I have this Firefox, very normal browser that I can use to communicate with people. That's fantastic. But what people are not asking is, during the Playpan investigation that was done by the FBI, wherein the FBI became the world's largest distributor of some very, very terrible stuff, how did they find the Tor server, which was the hidden service, and all of these other systems that are getting knocked down over and over? So it's the services themselves that people are connecting to that are the problem. And then if you look at the attacks that are being then used, kind of the trajectory becomes, you find the server that's misconfigured in some way, you find out who's hosting it, you attack that server, or you get a hold of the person who owns it, and then you load your exploits into the web page, and then the person comes to the website, they get access to the exploit, and then now you're unmasked as a Tor user, right? And so when you look at Playpen, they executed what, like 103 arrests or something like that. Don't quote me on that exact number, but I think it was like a low 100s number. It still got zero. To the best of my knowledge, it was zero individuals who were actually successfully prosecuted. At the end of it all, It just so happened that they were able to get access to all these people, go out, execute arrests, and then when they were asked, Tor, Tor, you know, hey, how did you do this? They had already spent like $1 million and something on the exploit, and then they just refused to tell anybody, and so the judge threw out the case. So uh, when you look at those things, and you look at the way that they're being exploited, I don't necessarily need to break the Tor browser itself. I don't need to break onion routing if I can attack Firefox, which is what the system's built on. And then if I have a direct connection to your browser directly to the server that I now own, it's much, much easier for me to execute that. And so what I'm not necessarily saying that it's not a good browser. What I'm telling you is if it fits within your risk index, potentially it's fine. And right, most of us in here are not going to do anything related to the point where we're going to have to worry about that, right? Maybe you're using Tor because you just don't want Google to follow you around the internet, and that's totally fine. And I honestly, I support that. If you're willing to go through the hoops and jump through all the stuff just because you don't want Google to know exactly who you are every minute of the day, more power to you. I'm okay with that. Uh, but what I'm also telling you is nothing is a silver bullet. So when you ask me what are some of the things can I do, can I virtualize my stuff? You could, but you're still going to need to understand that that virtualized system now has its own fingerprint. No different than if any of us here have done any kind of malware analysis, right? Have you ever uploaded malware into a virtual machine and then the malware doesn't run? And that's because why? Because the malware fingerprinted the box and then comes back and says, oh, this is a virtual machine. I bet somebody's trying to figure out what I am. I'm just not going to run. And it, crosses its little digital arms and it sits down and it refuses to play. And while that's a silly example, it's no different than any other kind of fingerprinting related to, hey, do I know what browser you're in? Do I know what operating system? Are you virtualized? Is the IP address coming back to a residential area or is it coming back to a business? Because I have web pages that if I go to and I try to use an EC2 instance, they will actually block it because the assumption is that I'm doing something on those EC2 instances that would be considered like hostile, like I'm downloading a ton of information. And so they just block the EC2 instance IP addresses. There's a block of IPs that are owned by Amazon. You grab that block and then you just block that, and now no EC2 instance can come to your web page. NordVPN. So am I okay on time? I don't know if we need to end so that you all have 5 minutes or not, but just interrupt me if I'm talking too much. Here's a web page right here. I'm going to dump this link in here. You can read it. I don't trust any company if your concern is like who has access to my data, right? Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where they're located. And anytime I see something that says like, oh, we won't communicate with US law enforcement. No, you will. You will. And they will. Like that's not a problem. You look at what happened with Anonymous, and we look at, and I'm just using the name. There was a service. It was called Hide My Ass. HMA, Hide My Ass, was the VPN that was used by the original guys who were doing the anonymous ops way back when. And HMA was, their entire thing was, we don't communicate with the government, we won't talk, we don't keep logs, we don't this, we don't do that, right? And they told everybody up and down, swore it, that no matter what happens, they'll never get the logs. Well, lo and behold, somebody walked in that door at some point and had a little bit more sway than somebody else. And eventually they forked up the logs and we were able to get enough information and link that back enough that they were able to get Sabu and all of these other individuals. And so when somebody gets up and they say, we're in this country, we're safe, we're protected, we're this, we're that, we're the other, there's no way that you can touch us, we're anti whatever government agency is the flavor of the day for who they don't like or whatever, that's great, that's really good advertising, but I don't believe literally any of it. Even to the point where I have had investigators come to me and say, hey, I did everything you told me, but I hit a VPN and I guess the investigation's over, so I'm going to close the case. And I said, no. Send him an email from your gov email. and just say, hey, I'm chasing a kitty porner. I need this information. Can you help me out? And lo and behold, you'd be shocked how many individuals will come back globally and say, actually, I don't like child pornographers. Here's all the information that we have. If you need anything else from us, we'll try to support however we can. Just don't make a habit of it. And the stuff still shows up in your email box. Now, sometimes somebody will jump back and they'll stamp their feet and cross their arms and scream that they're only all about privacy and et cetera, and they're never going to help you and, go to heck and so on and so forth, right? And that does happen, but I think personally that oftentimes it's much rarer, especially if you're willing to just, hey, this is what I've done, this is what I'm looking for. Do you have anything that could help me? And there are like file sharing companies and all kinds of stuff that are all over the planet that I have had no problems with them just, here you go. And even though even sometimes their stuff says that they would never do it, if your crimes are heinous enough, you can find somebody that would be willing to assist with that, like with dealing with that person. Sometimes stuff is just not okay with people, and that's how it should be, right? Or at least in my opinion, if you're doing something that's that bad, like catching you is, I'm okay with catching you. Um, so with that said, there's threats and fraud and all kinds of other cool stuff. And then in addition to that, the natural progression to this talk would be at some point you need to learn about how to prove who you are, not just to hide who you are, because GPG and the ability to sign communications and things like that is also very important, especially within our industry. If I send you something, you need to know that it came from me, and being able to use tools like GPG to add some kind of signature to whatever message that you send is very important. We see this with the Linux kernel, right? You can't make comments and you can't work on the Linux kernel without GPG and so on and so forth. Don't hesitate to implement that into what you do in the real world. Anything else I can do for you all? I think NordVPN says that they don't keep logs. I think that that's on their webpage. Don't quote me on that. But that's oftentimes the thing that people ask. They'll ask like, oh, if I use blankety blank VPN, it says that they're like magically delicious and super safe and they have heart, stars, and rainbows. Can I just use them forever? And my answer is always, it doesn't matter who has it. As long as it's somebody else's computer and you don't have access to it, then potentially somebody else has access to it. Awesome, Robert. Really appreciate that. I am going to stop sharing my screen. And then hopefully that didn't freeze. There it goes. I'm looking forward to it. So with that said, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening to me. I really appreciate it. And again, if there's anything else I can do, please don't hesitate to let me know.
Thank you, Aaron, for that presentation. Appreciate you doing this on very short notice.
Absolutely. If you ever need anything else, just don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're always happy to help.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for that. Do we have any final questions for Aaron? You can just drop them in the chat box or unmute.
Does the school offer work with the DoD as well as other private law enforcement?
So we don't offer any work. Any opportunities that you develop, obviously they would have to go through you. But what I would say is if those are individual groups that you're interested in working in, then as soon as possible, you need to start working towards whatever they offer in terms of, oftentimes they'll have internships, they'll have externships, you'll have opportunities to get involved in some capacity through CAE, just like we had Hack the Port and all kinds of other really cool stuff that's available, that's going on. Take advantage of all of those things and do it as early on within your educational career as possible. And no matter what school you're going to, make sure that you also take advantage of any competitions related to CAE that CAE offers, because oftentimes you can go in and you can network with individuals involved in those industries just based off of who shows up at the CAE competitions. And so CAE is just incredibly awesome. If you like networking and you want to meet people, go to the events and work with people within these events, just like you're doing right now. You're going to meet a ton of people. But there's no way that I could say that the school offers that, because absolutely no school does that.
Oh, okay. So how long is the training for the cyber?
Again, it's going to depend on you, but our students typically will graduate within about 2 years for the bachelor's, and then tack on maybe another 1.5 to 2 years, and you can get your master's. That would be, I've seen students kind of knock it out at that pace.
Oh, okay. So if you get your master's, is that equivalent for going up the ranks a little bit more, as you could say?
I know we're going over, and I hope nobody minds, but what I would tell you is, if you're going to work within education, you should pursue your master's or above. In addition to that, remember, especially if you're going to work within government, it's a point-based system. So let's just say, pretending that you decided to apply for Border Patrol, you get X number of points for prior service within the military. You get X number of points for, let's say, your bachelor's degree, and then you get X number of points for a master's degree, and then based on the point value that you have during that hiring process, that will put you above other individual, and I put above in air quotes, right? But they will make their decision on hiring based off of that point value. So again, having a master's can be incredibly valuable for a government job, but let's say that you were going to go apply at Google, they may not necessarily care as much about you having a master's, just because they want somebody who has way more experience, or have worked at a previous FANG type company or something like that.
Okay. I see how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I saw the Google's website where they were saying that Apple was tightening up on their security for hackers. So they were sending out a security update, because I guess the hackers was going to be able to control your phone and go into your contacts and so forth. So I saw that today.
Yeah, Apple's pushed out numerous updates over maybe the past, I don't know, 2-3 years on your phone. So there's been a ton of stuff that's been found. And then if you're also interested in Apple in terms of some of the cybersecurity related to that, Google Pegasus, or use your favorite search engine, Search X, whatever. But look up the Pegasus and kind of the Pegasus scandal, and then that'll give you some additional information of what's happened in terms of individuals overseas gaining access to vulnerabilities and then selling those vulnerabilities against things like cell phones to hostile governments, then use that against allies to the United States, as well as allies of the United States, like our friends have used it as well. A bunch of people went in and spent money to do very bad things. So just Google the Pegasus and run down that bounty hole, and that will that rabbit hole, and you can learn a lot about that. So with that said, we're way over time. If you don't mind, I'm gonna shut it down. You all have my email. No, it's not the same as Dear Aunt Sally. Pegasus is essentially a platform that you could get access to. Take a look and send me an email, ajones@uat.edu, if you all need anything.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Aaron. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hope everyone has a good one.
All right, you too.